Not so long ago, in a world full of strife, a man born a wolf, living a dual life. With magic in his veins, he walked the school hall, learning the arts, answering the call. But fear was a cloak he had to wear tight, hiding his truth, keeping darkness from light. Those who were scared turned away in despair, yet he bore the burden, he chose to take care. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare, with tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. In the shadows he lingered, where darkness would creep, protecting those kindly, never losing sleep. A guardian of secrets, a keeper of lore, he wandered through echoes, hearts wanting much more. No longer the wolf, but a sage with a pen, turning back the pages, reliving back then. His stories weave magic in the minds of the young, of battles and triumphs, where songs will be sung. Now the times have
No, it was OBS. It did its usual thing and changed where my microphone was. Yeah, it just completely removed my microphone from the system. I had to re-add it. Let's see, desktop audio, speakers, microphone, going to my MP. Yeah. Because what is a stream without scuff? I mean, even if it was going through my camera's microphone, it would have picked up something. But anyway, how's your week been? I had to go post that I was live, which, I keep forgetting it. Long weeks do happen, but it's Friday Eve, so it's almost over. Oh, my weather thing is saying I might get an inch of snow. Lovely. Could have sworn it was supposed to be spring. I mean, we've already had spring break. Why are we getting snow again? Well, let's see. Anyway, the stuff I was talking about before finding out I was muted, or my microphone was disabled. I've got one last story of Professor Von Dusen's problems, and we switch authors and go to do some new characters, which means I'll have to learn new voices. Because there's only so long I can do Professor Von Dusen's voice before I have to start losing my mind. Let's see. Make sure my phone is muted so nothing else pops up. But anyway, my book had apparently fallen off of the little shelf, so my bookmark had even fallen out of place. So I really did have to figure out which story I'd last read. Since it's been over a week since the last time I've done any mysteries. And I did Friday Night Fairy Tales last week, but I didn't do the mysteries on Thursday because I didn't get back until Friday. But it's already 9:12, so I'm already behind. So let's get into the stories. So our first story for the night. The pages are not together. There we go. Okay. Professor Von Dusen's Problems by Jacques Frutel. Number 6. The Stolen Banknotes. There was no mystery whatever about the identity of the man who, alone and unaided, robbed the 13th National Bank of $109,473 in cash and $1.29 in postage stamps. It was Mort Dolan, the expert safecracker, albeit a young one, and he had made a clean sweep. Nor yet was there any mystery about his whereabouts. He was safely in a cell at the police headquarters, having been captured within less than 12 hours after the robbery was discovered. Dolan had offered no resistance to the officers when he was cornered, and had attempted no denial when questioned by Detective Mallory. He knew he had been caught fairly and squarely, and no argument was possible. So he confessed with the glow of pride at a job well done. Welcome in, guilty. It was 4 or 5 days after his arrest that the matter came to the attention of Professor von Dusen. Then the problem was, well, but perhaps it were better to begin at the beginning. Despite the fact that he was considerably less than 30 years old, Mort Dolan was a man for whom the police had a wholesome respect. He had a record, for he had only started early. This robbery of the 13th National Bank was his big job, and was to have been his last. With the proceeds, he had intended to take his wife and quietly disappear beneath a full beard and an alias in some place far removed from his former haunts. But the mutability of human events is a matter of proverb. While the robbery as a robbery was a thoroughly artistic piece of work, and in full accordance with the plans which had been worked out to the minutest detail months before, he had made one mistake. This was leaving behind him in the bank the can in which the nitroglycerin had been brought. Throughout his carelessness, he had been traced. Dolan and his wife occupied 3 poor rooms in a poor tenement house. From the moment the police got a description of the person who bought the explosive, they were confident, for they knew their man. Therefore, 4 clever detectives were on the watch about the poor tenement. Neither Dolan nor his wife was there when they arrived, but from the condition of things in the rooms, the police believed that they had intended to return, so they took up their positions hopefully. Unsuspecting enough, for his one mistake in the robbery had not recurred to him, Dolan came along just about dusk and started up the 5 steps in front of the door of the tenement. It just happened that he glanced back and saw a head suddenly behind the projecting pillar. But the electric light glared strongly there, and Dolan recognized Detective Downey, one of the many men who revolved around Detective Mallory within a limited orbit. Now Dolan did not start nor do anything foolish. He paused a moment and rolled a cigarette while he thought it over. Perhaps instead of entering, it would be best to stroll on down the street, turn a corner, and make a dash for it. But just at that moment, he spied another head in the direction of contemplated flight. That was Detective Blanton. Deeply thoughtful, Dolan smoked half the cigarette and stared blankly in front of him. He knew of a back door opening to an alley. Perhaps the detectives had not thought to guard that. He tossed his cigarette away and entered the house with affected unconcern, and closed the unclean hall which extended the full length of the building. He flung open the back door. He turned back instantly. Just outside, he had seen and recognized Detective Cunningham. Then he had an inspiration. The roof. The building was 4 stories. He ran up the 4 flights, but rapidly, and was halfway up to the last, which led to the opening to the roof, when he stopped. From above he caught the whiff of a bad cigar, then the measured tread of heavy boots. Another detective. With a sickening depression at his heart, Dolan came softly down the stairs again, opened the door of his flat with the latchkey, and entered. Then and there he sat down to figure it all out. There seemed no escape for him. Every way out was blocked, and it was only a question of time before they would choose to close in on him. He imagined now that they were only waiting for his wife's return. He could fight for his freedom, of course, even kill one, perhaps two, of the detectives who were waiting for him. But that would only mean his own death. If he tried to run for just past either of the detectives, he would get a shot in the back. Besides, murder was repugnant to Dolan's artistic soul. It did not do any good, but he could warn his wife Isabel. He feared that she would walk into the trap as he had done, and she had had no connection of any sort to the affair. Then, from a fear that his wife would return, there swiftly came a fear that she would not. He suddenly remembered that it was necessary for him to see her. The police could not connect her with the robbery in any way. They could only hold her for a time, and then would be compelled to free her, for her innocence in this particular crime was beyond question. And if he were taken before she returned, she would be left penniless, and that was a thing which Dolan dreaded to contemplate. There was a spark of human tenderness in his heart, and in prison it would be comforting to know that she was well cared for. If she would only come now, he could tell her where the money. For 10 minutes, Dolan considered the question in all possible lights. A letter telling her where the money was? No, it would inevitably fall into the hands of the police. A cipher? She would never get it. How? 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 Every moment he expected a clamor at the door, which would mean that the police would come for him. They knew he was cornered. Whatever he did must be done quickly. Dolan took a long breath and started to roll another cigarette. With the thin white paper held in his left hand and the tobacco pouch raised in the other, he had an inspiration. For a little more than an hour after that, he was left alone. Finally, his quick ear caught the shuffle of stealthy feet in the hall. Then came an imperative rap at the door. The police were evidently feared to wait longer. Dolan was leaning against the sewing machine when the summons came. Instinctively, his hand closed in his revolver. Then he tossed it aside and walked to the door. "Well?" he demanded. "Listen, Dolan," came the reply. "That you, Downey?" Dolan inquired. "Yes. Now don't make any mistakes, Mort. There are 3 of us here, and the Cunningham is in the alley watching your window. There's no way out." For one instant, only an instant, Dolan hesitated. It was not that he feared prison, it was a regret at being caught. He had planned it all so differently, and the little woman would be heartbroken. Finally, with a quick backward glance to the sewing machine, he opened the door. 3 revolvers were thrust in his face with a unanimity that spoke well for the police opinion of the man. Dolan promptly raised his hands over his head. "Oh, put down your guns," he expostulated. "I'm not crazy. My gun is over there on the couch." Detective Downey, by a personal search, corroborated the statement, and then the revolvers were lowered. "I know what your stinky foot guilty." "The chief wants you," he said. "It's about the 13th National Bank robbery." "All right," said Dolan calmly, and he held his hands out for the steel nippers. "Now, Mort," said Downey ingratiatingly, "you can save us a lot of trouble by telling us where the money is." "Doubtless I could," was the ambiguous response. Detective Downey looked him up and down and understood. Cunningham was called in from the alley. He and Downey remained in the apartment, and the other 2 men led Dolan away. In the natural course of events, the prisoner appeared before Detective Maurer at police headquarters. They were well acquainted professionally. Dolan told everything frankly, but the inception of the plan to the actual completion of the crime. The detective sat with his feet on his desk listening. At the end, he leaned forward towards the prisoner. "And Where is the money? He asked. Dolan paused long enough to roll a cigarette. Well, it's my business, he responded pleasantly. Well, you might as well tell us, insisted Detective Mallory. We shall find it, of course, and it will save us trouble. I'll just bet you have a hat and you don't find it, replied Dolan, and there was a glitter of triumph in his eyes. On this level, between man and man now, I will bet you a hat that you never find that money. You're on, replied Detective Mallory. He looked keenly at his prisoner, and his prisoner looked back without giving a quiver. Did your wife get away with it? From the question, Dolan surmised that she had not been arrested. No, he answered. Is it in your flat? Downey and Cunningham are searching for it right now, was the rejoinder. They will report what they find. There was a silence for several minutes as the two men, officer and prisoner, stared at each other. When the thief takes refuge in a refusal to answer questions, he becomes a difficult subject to handle. There was the third degree, of course, but Dolan was the kind of man who would only laugh at that. The kind of man from whom anything less than physical torture could not bring a statement if he chose not to make it. Detective Mallory was perfectly aware of this dogged trait in the man's character. It's this way, Chief, explained Dolan at last. I robbed the bank, I got the money, and now it's where you'll never find it. I did it by myself, and I'm willing to take my medicine. Nobody helped me. My wife, I knew your men waited for her before they took me. My wife knows nothing on earth about it. She had no connection with the thing at all, and she can prove that. That's all I'm going to say. You might as well make up your mind to it. Detective Mallory's eyes snapped. You will tell me where that money is, he blustered. Or I'll see that you get... 20 years is the absolute limit, interrupted Dolan quietly. I'll expect to get 20 years. That's the worst you can do to me. The detective stared at him hard. And besides, Dolan went on, I won't get lonesome when I get where I'm going. I've got lots of friends there. Been there before. One of the jailers is the best bridge player I've ever met. Like most men who find themselves balked at by the outset, Detective Mallory sought to appease his indignation by heaping invective upon the prisoner, by threats, by promises, by wheedling, by bluster. It was all the same. Dolan remained silent. Finally, he was led away and locked up. A few minutes later, Downey and Cunningham appeared. One glance told their chief that they could not enlighten him on the whereabouts of the stolen money. Do you have any idea where it is? He demanded. No, but I've got a definite idea where it isn't, replied Dolan grimly. It isn't in that flat. There's not one square inch of it that we didn't go over, not one object that we didn't tear to pieces looking. It simply isn't there. He hid it somewhere before we got him. Well, take all the men you want and keep at it, instructed Detective Mallory. One of you, by the way, had better bring Dolan's wife. I'm fairly certain that she had nothing to do with it, but she might know something, and I can bluff a woman. Detective Mallory announced that accomplishment as if it were a thing to be proud of. There's nothing to do now but to get the money. Meanwhile, I'll see that Dolan isn't permitted to communicate with anybody. There's always a chance, suggested Downey, that a man as clever as Dolan could, in a cipher letter or by some seemingly innocent remark, inform her where the money is if we assume she doesn't know, and that should be guarded against. It will be guarded against, declared Detective Mallory emphatically. Dolan will not be permitted to see or talk to anyone for the present, not even a lawyer. He may weaken later on. But day succeeded day, and Dolan showed no signs of talking. His wife, meanwhile, had been apprehended and subjected to the third degree. When the ordeal was over, the net result was that Detective Mallory was convinced that she had had nothing whatsoever to do with the robbery and had not been the faintest idea where the money was. Half a dozen times Dolan asked permission to see her or to write to her. Each time, the request was curtly refused. Newspapermen, with and without inspiration, had sought the money vainly, and the police were now seeking to trace the movements of Mort Dolan from the moment of the robbery until the moment of his appearance on the steps of the house where he lived. In this way, they hoped to get an inkling of where the money had been hidden, for the idea of the money being in the flat had been abandoned. Dolan simply would not say anything. Finally, one day, Hutcherson Hatch, reporter, made an exhaustive search of Dolan's flat for the fourth time, then went over to police headquarters to talk it over with Mallory. While the president Ashe and two directors of the victimized bank appeared, they were worried. "Is there any trace of the money?" asked Mr. Ashe. "Not yet," responded Detective Mallory. "Well, could we talk to Dolan a few minutes?" "If we didn't get anything out of him, you won't," said the detective. "But it won't do any harm. Come along." Dolan did not seem particularly glad to see them. He came to the bars of his cell and peered through. It was only when Mr. Ashe was introduced to him as the president of the 13th National Bank that he seemed to take any interest in his visitors. The interest took the form of a grin. Mr. Ashe evidently had something of importance on his mind, and was seeking the happiest method of expression. Once or twice he spoke aside to his companions, and Dolan watched them curiously. At last, he turned to the prisoner. "You admit that you robbed the bank?" he asked. "There's no need denying it," replied Dolan. "Well," said Mr. Ashe, in a hesitated moment, "the board of directors has had a meeting this morning, and speaking on their behalf, I want to say something. If you will inform us of the whereabouts of the money, we will, upon its recovery, exert every effort within our power to have your sentence cut in half. In other words, as I understand it, you have given the police no trouble, you have confessed the crime, and this, with the return of the money, would wait for you when the sentence is pronounced. Say the maximum is 20 years. We might be able to get you off with 10 if we get the money." Detective Mallory looked doubtful. He realized perhaps the futility of such a promise, yet he was silent. The proposition might draw out something on which to proceed. "Can't see it," said Dolan at last. "It's this way. I'm 27 years old. I'll get 20 years. About 2 of that'll come off for good behavior, so we'll get 18. At the end of that time, I'll come out with $109,000 odd, rich for life, and able to retire 45 years. In other words, while I'm in prison, I'll be working for a good, stiff salary, something really worthwhile. Very few men are able to retire at 45. Mr. Ashe readily realized the truth of this statement. It was the point of the view of a man to whom mere prison has few terrors, a man content to remain immured for 20 years for a consideration. He turned and spoke aside to the two directors again. "But I'll tell you what I will do," said Dolan after a pause. "If you'll fix it so that I only get, say, 2 years, I'll give you half the money." There was silence. Detective Mallory strolled along the corridor beyond the view of the prisoner and summoned President Ashe to his side with a jerk of his head. "Agreed to that," he said. "Perhaps he really will give up." "But it wouldn't be possible to arrange it, would it?" asked Mr. Ashe. "Certainly not," said the detective. "But agree to it. Get your money, if you can, and then we'll nail him anyhow." Mr. Ashe stared at him for a moment, vaguely indignant at the treachery of the thing. Then greed triumphed. He walked back to the cell. "We agree to that, Mr. Dolan," he said briskly. "Fix a 2 year sentence for you to return half the money." Dolan smiled a little. "All right, go ahead," he said. "When the sentence is 2 years is pronounced, and the first-class lawyer arranges it for me so that the matter can never be reopened, I'll tell you where you can get your half." "But of course we must tell us that now," said Mr. Ashe. Dolan smiled cheerfully. It was a taunting, insinuating, accusing sort of smile, and it informed the bank president that the duplicity contemplated was discovered. Mr. Ashe was silent for a moment, and then blushed. "Nothing doing," said Dolan, and he retired to a recess in his cell, and his interests in the matter were at an end. But we agreed. The money now," stammered Mr. Ashe. "It was a large sum, and the theft has crippled us considerably." "All right," said Dolan quickly. "The sooner I get 2 years, the sooner you get it." "How can it be fixed?" "I'll leave that to you." And that was all. The bank president and the two directors went out fuming impotently. Mr. Ashe paused in Detective Mallory's office long enough for a final word. "Of course, it was brilliant work on the part of the police to capture Dolan," he said caustically, "but it isn't doing us a particle of good. All I see now is that we lose $109,000. "It looks very much like it," assented the detective. "Unless we find it." "Well, why don't you find it?" Detective Mallory had to give it up. "What did Dolan do with the money?" Hutchinson Hatch was asking the Professor von Dusen. The distinguished scientist and logistician was sitting with his head pillowed on a cushion, and with his squint eyes turned upward. "It isn't in the flat. Everything indicates that it was hidden somewhere else." "And Dolan's wife?" inquired the professor in his perpetually irritated cell. Hold on. Now it stuck the page. I'll try that again. "And Dolan's wife?" inquired the professor in his perpetually irritated voice. "It seems conclusive that she has no idea where it is." "She has been put through the 3rd degree," explained the reporter, "and if she had known, she would probably have told." "Is she living in the flat now?" "No, she's staying with her sister. The flat is under lock and key. Mallory has the key. He has shown the utmost care in everything he has done. Dolan has not been permitted to write or to see his wife for fear that he would let her know somewhere what the money is. He has not been permitted to communicate with anybody at all, not even his lawyer. He did see the President Ashe and two directors of the bank, but naturally he wouldn't give them a message for his wife." The professor was silent for 5, 10, 20 minutes, and he sat with the long, slender fingers pressed tip to tip, squinting unblinkingly at the ceiling. Hatch waited patiently. "Of course," said the scientist at last. $109,000, even in large bills, would make a considerable bundle, and would be extremely difficult to hide in a place that has been gone over so often. We may suppose, therefore, that it isn't in the flat. What have the detectives learned as to Dolan's whereabouts after the robbery and before he was taken?" "Nothing," replied Hatch. "Nothing absolutely. He seemed to disappear off the earth for a time. That time, I suppose, was when he was disposing of the money. His plans were evidently well laid." "It would be possible, of course, by the simple rules of logic, to sit still here and ultimately locate the money," remarked the professor musingly. "But it would take a long time. We might begin, for instance, with the idea of the contemplated flight. When? By rail or by steamer? The answers to those questions would, in a way, enlighten us as to the possible location of the money, because, remember, it would have to be placed where it was readily accessible in case of flight. But the process would be a long one. Perhaps it would be best to make Dolan tell us where he hid it. It would if he would tell, agreed the reporter, but he is reticent to a degree that is maddening where the money is mentioned. Naturally, remarked the scientist. That really doesn't matter. I have no doubt he will inform me. So Hatch and the professor called upon Detective Mallory. They found him in a deep abstraction. He glanced up from the intrusion with an appearance almost as a relief. He knew intuitively what it was. If you can find out where that money is, Professor, he declared emphatically, you can't. The professor squinted into the official's eyes thoughtfully, and the corners of his straight mouth were drawn down disapprovingly. I think perhaps there has been a little too much caution here, Mr. Mallory, he said. I have no doubt Dolan will inform me where the money is. As I understand it, his wife is practically without means. Yes, was the reply. She's living with her sister. And he has asked several times to be permitted to write or to see her. Oh, yes, dozens of times. Well, now suppose you do let him see her, suggested the professor. Lord, that's just what he wants, blurted the detective. If he sees her, I will know he will, in some way, by something he says, by a gesture, by a look, inform her where the money is. As it is now, I know she does not know where it is. Well, if he informs her, won't he also inform us? Demanded the professor. If Dolan wants to convey knowledge of the whereabouts to the money to let his wife let in and talk to her, let him give her the information. I will dare say that she is clever enough to interpret a spoken word as a clue to where the money is, and I am too. The detective thought it over. He knew this little crab scientist with the enormous head, and he knew, too, some of the amazing results he had achieved by methods wholly unlike those known by the police. But in this case, he was frankly in doubt. This way, the professor continued. Get his wife here, and let her pass Dolan's cell and speak to him so that he will know that she is, and let her carry on the conversations with him while she is beyond his sight. Have a stenographer, without the knowledge of either, take down just what is said, word for word. Give me a transcript of the conversation, and hold on the wife to some pretext until I can study it a little. If he gives her a clue, I'll get the money. There was not the slightest trace of egotism in his irritable tones. It seemed merely a statement of fact. Detective Mallory, looking at the wizened face of the logistician, was doubtful beyond hopeful, and at last he consented to the experiment. The wife was sent for and came eagerly. A stenographer was placed in the cell adjoining Dolan's, and Mrs. Dolan was led along the corridor. She paused in front of Dolan's cell. He started towards her with an exclamation. Then she was led a little way out of sight. With face pressed close against the bars, Dolan glowered upon Detective Mallory and Hatch. An expression of awful ferocity leapt into his eyes. What are you doing with her? He demanded. Mort, she called. Belle, is that you? They told me you wanted to talk to me, she exclaimed. She was panting fiercely as she struggled to shake off the hands which held her beyond his sight. What sort of game is this, Mallory? Demanded the prisoner. You've wanted to talk to her, replied Mallory. Now go ahead. You may talk, but you must not see her. That's it, then, eh? Said Dolan. Why did you bring her for, then? Is she under arrest? Mort, came his wife's voice again. They won't let me come to see where I can see you. There was utter silence for a moment. Hatch was overpowered by a feeling that he was interrupting on a family tragedy, and tiptoed beyond reach of Dolan's roving eyes to where the professor was sitting on a stool, twiddling his fingers. After a moment, the detective joined them. Belle? Whispered Dora again. This whisper. Don't say anything, Mort, she commanded. Cunningham and Blanton are holding me. The others are listening. I don't want to say anything, said Dolan. I did want to see you. I want to know that you're getting along all right. Are you still at the flat? No, I'm at my sister's, was the reply. I have no money, and I can't stay at the flat. You know they're going to send me away. Yes, was almost instant sob in her voice. I know it. Then I'll get the limit. 20 years. Yes. Can you get along? I will do something, was the reply. Oh, Mort, why? Oh, never mind that, he interrupted impatiently. It doesn't do any good to regret things. It isn't what I planned, little girl, but it's here. So I'll meet it. I'll get a good behavior allowance. That'll save 2 years, and then... There was a menace in the tone which was not lost upon the listeners. 18 years, he heard her moan. For one instant, Dolan's lips were pressed tightly together, and in that instant he had a regret. A regret that he had not killed Blanton and Cunningham rather than submit to capture. She took off his anger with an effort. I don't know if they'll permit me to ever see you, he said desperately. As long as I refuse to tell where the money is hidden, and I know they'll never permit me to write you for fear I'll tell you where it is. So suppose the goodbye will be like this. I'm sorry, little girl. He heard her weeping and hurled himself against the bars in a passion. It passed after a moment. He must not forget that she was penniless, and the money, that vast fortune. There's one more thing you need from me, Belle, he said calmly. This sort of thing doesn't do any good. Brace up, little girl, and wait. Wait for me. 18 years is not forever. We're both young, and... but never mind that. I wish you would please go up to the flat and... Do you remember my heavy brown coat? Yes, the old one, she asked. That's it, he answered. It's cold in here in the cell. Will you please go up to the flat when they let you loose and sew up that tear under my right arm and send it here to me? It's probably the last favor I'll ask for you for a long time. So, will you do it this afternoon? Yes, she answered tearfully. The tear is under the right arm, and be certain to sew it up, said Dolan again. Perhaps when I'm tired, I shall give you a chance to see you. The professor rose and stretched himself a little. That's all that's necessary, Mr. Mallory, he said. Have her held until I tell you to release her. Mallory made a motion to Cunningham and Blanton, and the woman was led away, screaming. Hutch shuddered a little, and Dolan, not understanding, flung himself against the bars of his cell like a caged animal. Clever, aren't you? He snarled as he caught sight of Detective Mallory. Thought I tried to tell her where it was, but I didn't, and you'll never know where it is, not in 1,000 years. Accompanied by the professor and Hatch, the detective went back to his private office. All were silent, and the detective glanced from time to time into the eyes of the scientist. Now, Mr. Hatch, we have the whereabouts of the money settled, said the professor quietly. Please go at once to the flat and bring the brown coat Dolan mentioned. Dare I say the secret of the hidden money is somewhere in that coat. But 2 of my men have already searched the coat, protested the detective. That doesn't make it less difference, snapped the scientist. The reporter went without a word. Half an hour later he returned with the brown coat. It was a commonplace-looking garment, badly worn and in sad need of repair. Not only in the tear under the arm, but in other places. When he saw the professor nodded his head abruptly, as if he had just what he expected. Money can't be in that. I'll bet my head on it, declared the Detective Mallory flatly. There isn't room for it. The thinking machine gave him a glance in which there was a touch of pity. We know, he said, that the money isn't in the coat, but you can't see that it is perfectly possible that a slip of paper on which no one has written down the hiding place of the money can be hidden somewhere in it. Can't you see that he asked for the coat, which is not a good one, a coat that is the coat he's wearing now, in order to attract his wife's attention to it? Then, seam by seam, the brown coat was taken to pieces. Each piece in turn was submitted to the sharpest scrutiny. Nothing resulted. Detective Mallory frankly regarded it all as a wasted effort, and when there remained nothing of the coat save strip cloths and lining that was inclined to be triumphant, then the professor was merely thoughtful. It went further back than that, the scientist mused. Some tiny wrinkles appeared in his dome-like brow. Mr. Hatch, please go back to the flat. Look in the sewing machine drawers or work baskets, and you will find the spots of brown thread. Bring it to me. How do you know there's a spool of brown thread there? Said the detective. I know it because Mr. Hatch will bring it back to me, snapped the professor. I know it by the simplest logic and most rudimentary rules of logic. Hatch went out again. In half an hour he returned with the spool of brown thread. Professor Von Dusen's white fingers closed on it eagerly, and his watery squint eyes examined it. A portion of it had been used. The spool was only half gone. But he noted, as he did, his eyes reflected in the glitter of triumph, he noticed that a paper scrap on each end was still in place. Now, Mr. Mallory, he said, I'll demonstrate to you that the police are dealing with a man far beyond the ordinary bank thief. In his way, he is a genius. Look here. With a penknife, he ripped off the paper caps, and then looked through the hole in the spool. For an instant his face showed blank amazement. Then he put the spool down on the table and squinted at it for a moment in absolute silence. It must be here, he said at last. It must be. Why else did he choose? Of course. With the quick fingers he began to unwind the thread. Yard after yard it rolled off from his hand, and finally the mass of brown on the spool appeared a white strip. In another instant the thinking machine held it in his tiny hand, a thin sheet of paper, a cigarette paper. It had been wound around the spool, and the thread wound over it so smoothly that it was impossible to see that it had ever been removed. The detective and Hatch were leaning over his shoulder, curiously watching him. The tiny paper unfolded. Something was written on it. Slowly, the professor deciphered it. 47 Causeway Street, basement, 10th flagstone from northeast corner. And there the money was found. 109,437. The house was unoccupied, and within easy reach of the wharf from which the European-bound steamer sailed. Within half an hour of sailing time, it would have been an easy matter for Dolan to recover it all, and that without in the least expecting the suspicion of him those who might have been watching him. For a saloon next door opened into an alley behind, and a broken window in the basement gave quick access to the treasure. Dolan reasoned, the professor explained, that even if he was never permitted to see his wife, she would probably use that thread and in time find the directions for recovering the money. Further, he argued that the police would never suspect that a spool contained a secret for which they sought so long. His conversation with his wife today was merely to draw her attention to something which would have required her to use the spool of brown thread. The brown coat was all that he could think of, and that's all, I think. Dolan was sadly surprised when the news of the recovery of the money was broken to him, but a certain quaint philosophy did not desert him. He gazed at Detective Mallory incredulously, and as the story was told, at the end he went over and sat down in his cell cot. Well, Chief, he said, I didn't think it was you. That makes me owe you a hat. Ouch. Okay. And now we're going to have to go to ads because I had to pause them on that stream. So I will see everyone in a bit. Oh, there were two cats when I came over to it. Now there's only one. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good break. I don't know what my ads are anymore, so hope they're interesting. Kind of curious, what kind of ads do they show on my stream? Especially since Twitch has been so picky about their new ad rules. Ouch. I mean, last time I paid any attention to the ads, I was... Is it echoing for anyone else, or is it just me? Maybe output only. Okay, output only works for me. As long as I know my voice is getting out there somehow. And there's a sucker. Oop, wrong one. Anyway, that was the last of the stories from Professor Von Dusen's Problems. It is so weird that this book uses different fonts. Different font sizes, different print depth. On the same book. Why would anyone do that? Well, besides me writing everything in prime numbers. But that's in my own book, so I can do whatever the weird, crazy stuff I want to do. But we're going into a new author, George Griffith. And let's see. Check to see how long the story is, because it might be longer than the other ones have been. Especially when it says it's the complete story. Okay. That's... Okay, that's interesting. Okay, it's only 10 pages for the first story. Quick hydrate. So our next story for this wonderful Thursday night, IDB, Being Tales of the Diamond Fields, retold by George Griffiths. 500 Carats, a complete story. It was several months after the brilliant, if somewhat mysterious, recovery of £15,000 parcel from the notorious but now vanished Seth Salter that I had the pleasure, and I think I may fairly add the privilege, of making the acquaintance of Inspector Lipinski. I can say without hesitation that in the course of wanderings which I have led over a considerable portion of the lands and seas of the world, I've never met a more interesting man than he was. I say poor. I say was, poor fellow, for he is no longer anything but a memory of bitterness to the IDB. But that is a yarn with another twist. There is no need for further explanation of this all too brief intimacy which followed our introduction than the statement of the fact that the greatest South African detective of this day was after all a man as well as a detective, and hence not only justifiably proud of many brilliant achievements which illustrated his career, but also by no means loth in some day the story of them should, with all due and proper precautions and reservations, be told to a wider and possibly less prejudiced audience than the motley and migratory population of the camp, as it was in his day. I had not been 5 minutes in the cozy, tastily finished sanctum of his low, broad-roofed bungalow in New De Beers Road before I saw it was a museum as well as a study. Specimens of all sorts of queer apparatus employed by the IDBs for smuggling diamonds were scattered all over the tables and mantelpiece. There were massive, handsomely carved briar and meerschaum pipes which seemed to hold wonderfully little tobacco for their size, rough sticks of firewood ingeniously hollowed out, which must have been worth a good round sum in their time, hollow handles of travelling trunks, ladies' boot heels of the fashion affected on the memorable occasion by Mrs. Michael Mortensen, and novels, hymn books, church services, and Bibles, with cavities cut out of the center of their leaves, which had once held thousands of pounds worth of illicit stones on their unsuspected passage through the post. But none of these interested, or indeed puzzled me so much as did a couple of curiously assorted articles which lay under a little glass case on a wall bracket. One was an ordinary piece of heavy lead tubing, about 3 inches long and an inch in diameter, sealed by fusing at both ends, and having a little brass cap fused on one end. The other was a small ragged piece of dirty red sheet, India rubber, very thin, in fact almost transparent, and, roughly speaking, 4 or 5 inches square. I was looking at these things, wondering what on earth could be the connection between them and what manner of strange story might be connected with them, when the inspector came in. "Good evening. Glad to see you," he said in his quiet and almost gentle voice, and without a trace of foreign accent, as we shook hands. "Well, what do you think of my museum? I dare say you've guessed already that if some of these things could speak, they could keep your readers entertained for some little time, eh?" Well, there's no reason why their owner shouldn't speak for them, I said, making the obvious reply. Provided always, of course, it wouldn't be giving away too many secrets of state. Oh, my dear sir, he said, with a smile which curled up at the ends of his little black, carefully trimmed mustache ever so slightly. I should not have made you promise at the club the other night if I had not been prepared to absolutely rely on your discretion and my own. Now, there's whiskey and soda and brandy. Which do you prefer? You smoke, of course, and I think you'll find these pretty good. And that chair I can recommend. I've unraveled many a naughty problem in it, I can tell you. And now, he went on when we were at last comfortably settled, may I ask which of my relics most roused your professional curiosity? I was already on the tip of my tongue to ask the story of the gas pipe and the piece of india rubber, but the inspector forestalled me by saying, But perhaps that is hardly a fair question, as they all will probably seem pretty strange to you. Now, for instance, I saw you looking at two of my curios when I came in. You could hardly expect them to be associated, and very intimately too, with the most daring and skilfully planned diamond robbery that ever took place in the fields, or off them, for the matter of fact. Would you? Hardly, I said, and yet I think I've learned enough of the devious ways of the IDB to be prepared for a perfectly logical explanation of the fact. As logical as I think I may fairly say romantic, replied the inspector as he set his glass down. In one sense, it was the most ticklish problem I've ever had to tackle. Of course, you've heard some version or other of the disappearance of the great De Beers diamond. I should rather think I had, I said with a decided thrill of pleasurable anticipation, for I felt sure that now, if ever, I was going to get to the bottom of that great mystery. Everybody in camp seems to have a different version of it, and, of course, everyone seems to think that if he had only had a management of the case, the mystery would have been solved long ago. It is invariably the case, said the inspector, with another of his quiet, pleasant smiles, that everyone can do work better than those whose reputation depends upon doing of it. We are not altogether fools at the department, and yet I have to confess that I myself was in ignorance as just how the diamond disappeared, or where it got to, until 12 hours ago. Now I'm going to tell you the facts exactly as they are, but under the condition that you will alter all the names except, if you choose, my own, and that you will not publish the story for at least 12 months to come. There are personal and private reasons for which you will probably understand without my stating them. Of course, it will in time leak out into the papers, although there has been and will be no prosecution. But anything in the newspapers of necessity will be garbled and incorrect, and, well, I may as well confess that I am sufficiently vain to wish that my share of the transaction shall not be left altogether to the tender mercies of the imaginative penny-a-liner. I acknowledged the compliment with a bow as graceful as the easiness of the inspector's chair would allow me to make, but I said nothing, as I wanted to get to the story. I had better begin at the beginning, the inspector went on, as he meditatively snipped the end of a fresh cigar. As I suppose you already know, the largest and most valuable diamond ever found on these fields was really a magnificent stone, a perfect octahedron, pure white without a flaw, and weighing close to 500 carats. There's a photograph of it here on the mantelpiece. I've got another one by me. I'll give it to you before you leave Kimberley. Well, this stone was found about 6 months ago in one of the dives in the 800-foot level of the Kimberley mine. It was taken by the overseer straight to the De Beers offices and placed on the secretary's desk. You know where he sits, on the right-hand side, so you go into the boardroom through the green glazed doors. There were several of the directors present at the time, and, as you may imagine, they were pretty well pleased at the find, for the stone, without any exaggeration, was worth a prince's ransom. Of course, I needn't tell you that the value per carat of a diamond which is perfect, of a good color, increases a sort of geometrical progression with its size. I dare say that the stone was worth anywhere between 1 and 2 millions, according to the depth of the purchaser's purse. It was worthy to adorn the proudest crown in the world instead of. But there, you'll think me very poor storyteller if I anticipate. Well, the diamond, after being duly admired, was taken upstairs to the diamond room by the secretary himself, accompanied by two of the directors. Of course, you have been through the new offices, it appears, but still, perhaps I had better just run over the ground, as the locality is rather important. You know that when you get upstairs and turn to the right from the landing, from the top of the staircase, there's a door with a little grill on it. You knock, a trapdoor is raised, and if you are recognized and your business warrants it, you are admitted. Then you go along a little passage out of which a little room opens on the left, and in front of you is another room leading into the diamond rooms themselves. You know, too, that in the main room fronting Stockdale Street and Jones Street, the diamond tables runs around two sides under windows, and are railed off from the rest of the room by a single light wooden rail. There's a table in the middle of the room, and on your right, as you go in, there's a big safe standing against the wall. You will remember, too, that in the corner exactly facing the door stands a glass case containing the diamond scales. I want you to particularly to recall the fact that these scales stand diagonally across the corner in the window. The secondary room, as you know, opens out to the left, but that is not of much consequence. I signified my resemblance with these details, and the inspector went on. The diamond was first put on the scale and weighed in the presence of the secretary and the two directors by one of the highest officials, a licensed diamond broker and the most trusted employee of De Beers, whom you may call Philip Marsden when you come to write the story. The weight, as I told you, in round figures was 500 carats. The stone was then photographed, partly for purposes of identification, and partly as a reminder of the biggest stone ever found in Kimberley in its rough state. The gem was then handed over to Mr. Marsden's care pending the departure of the diamond posts of Viborg on the following Monday. This was a Tuesday. The secretary saw it locked up in the big safe by Mr. Marsden, who, as usual, was accompanied by another official, a younger man than himself, whom you can call Henry Lomas, a connection of his, and also one of his most trusted members of his staff. Every day, and sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, either the secretary or one of the directors comes to ask and look at the big stone, either for their own satisfaction or to show it to some of their more intimate friends. I ought, perhaps, to have told you before the whole diamond room staff were practically sworn to secrecy on the subject because, as you will already understand, it was not considered desirable for such an exceedingly valuable find to be made public property in a place like this. When Saturday came, it was decided not to send it down to Cape Town for some reasons connected with the state of the market. When the safe was opened on Monday morning, the stone was gone. I needn't attempt to describe the absolute panic which followed. It had been seen 2 or 3 times in the safe on Saturday, and the secretary himself was positive that it was there at closing time, because he saw it was in the safe as being locked for the night. In fact, he actually saw it put in, for it had been taken out to show to a friend of his before a few moments. The safe had not been tampered with, nor could it have been tampered with or unlocked, because when it is closed for the night it cannot be opened again unless either the secretary or the managing director is present, as they each have the master key, within which the key used during the day is of no use. Of course, I was sent for immediately, and I admit that I was fairly staggered. If the secretary had not been so positive that the stone was locked up when he saw the safe was closed on Saturday, I should have worked upon the story, only possible one, as it seemed, that the stone had been abstracted from the safe during the day and concealed in the room, and somehow or other smuggled out, even though that would have been almost impossible in consequence of the strictness of the searching system and the almost certain discovery which would have been followed in attempts to get it out of the town. Both rooms were searched in every nook and cranny, the whole staff, naturally feeling that every one of them must be suspected, immediately volunteered to subject to any process of search that I might think satisfactory, and I can assure you the search was a very thorough one. Nothing was found, and when we had done that, there was a scintilla of evidence to warrant us suspecting anybody. It was true that the diamond was last actually seen by the secretary in charge of Mr. Marsden and Mr. Lomas. Mr. Marsden opened the safe, Mr. Lomas put the tray containing the big stone and several other fine ones into the usual compartment, and the safe door was locked. Therefore, the fact went for nothing. I suppose that one of the diamond room staff always remains in the room at night. There's at least one night watchman on every landing, and the frontages are patrolled at night by armed men of the special police. Lomas was on duty on Saturday night. He was searched as usual when he came off duty on Sunday morning. Nothing was found, and I recognized that it was absolutely impossible that he could have brought the diamond out of the room or passed it to any confederates in the street without having been discovered. Therefore, though at first sight suspicion might have been pointed to him as being the one who had apparently the last in the room with the diamond, there was absolutely no reason to connect that fact with its disappearance. I must say that there's a great deal plainer than the matter of fact than the other stories, as I've heard of the mysterious disappearance, I said, as the inspector paused to refill his glass and asked me to do likewise. Yes, he said dryly. The truth is more commonplace up to a certain point than the sort of stories a stranger will find floating about Kimberley. But I dare say you have found your own profession that in some times has a way of, to put it sportingly enough, giving fiction a 7-pound handicap and beating it with a counter. For my own part, I answered with an affirmative nod, my money would go on the fact every time. Therefore it would be to go on if I were betting. At any rate, I may say that none of the fiction that I have had so far has offered a reasonable explanation of the disappearance of the diamond. Given that the conditions which you have just stated, and as far as I can see, I admit that I couldn't give the remotest guess as to the solution of the mystery. That's exactly what I said to myself after I'd been worrying day and night for more than a week over it, said the inspector. And then, he went on, suddenly getting up from his seat and beginning to walk up and down the room with quick, irregular strides. All of a sudden, in the middle of a very smaller puzzle, just one of the common IDB cases we have almost every week, the whole of the work that I was engaged upon vanished from my mind, leaving it for the moment a perfect blank. Then, like a lightning flash out of the black cloud, there came a momentary ray of light which showed me the clue to the mystery. That was the idea. These, he said, stopping in front of the mantelpiece and putting his finger on the glass case which covered the two relics that had started the story. These were the materialization of it. And yet, my dear inspector, I ventured to interrupt, you will perhaps pardon me for saying that your ray of light leaves me just as much in the dark as ever. But your darkness shall be made day, all in good course, he said with a smile. I could see that he had an eye for dramatic effect, and so I thought it was better to let him tell the story uninterrupted and in his own way, so I simply assured him of my ever-increasing interest and waited for him to go on. He took a couple of turns up and down the room in silence, as though he were considering in what form he should spring the solution of the mystery upon me. Then he stopped and said abruptly, I didn't tell you that the next morning, that is to say Sunday, Mr. Marsden went out on horseback, shooting in the veld up towards the range of the hills which lies over yonder, and in the northwestward between here and Berkeley West. I can see by your face that you're already asking yourself, what has this got to do with the sprinting of $1 million or so's worth of crystallized carbon out of the safe at De Beers? Well, a little patience and you shall see. Early that same Sunday morning, I was walking down Stockdale Street in front of the De Beers offices, smoking a cigar, and, of course, worrying my brains out about the diamond. I took a long draw at my weed and quite involuntarily put my head back and blew it up into the air. There, just like that, the cloud drifted diagonally across the street, dead in the direction of the hills, on which Mr. Philip Marsden would just be hunting buck. At the same instant, the revelation which had scattered my thoughts about the little case that I just mentioned came back to me. I saw in my mind's eye, of course. Well, now, what do you think I saw? I wouldn't spoil a comparative detective, I said, somewhat invariably. I should say that you would make an excellent storyteller. Never mind what I think. I'm in a plastic condition now, and I'm receiving impressions, not making them. Now, what did you see? I saw the Great De Beers diamond, say from 10 to 1,500,000 pounds worth of concentrated capital, floating from the upper story of the De Beers Consolidated Mining, rising over the rooftops, and drifting down the wind to Philip Marsden's hunting ground. To say that I stared in silence of blank amazement at the inspector, who made this astounding assertion with a dramatic gesture and inflection which naturally cannot be reproduced in print, would be the merest commonplace. He seemed to take my stare for one of incredulity rather than wonder, for he said almost sharply, I see you're beginning to think that I'm thinking fiction now, but never mind, we will see about that later on. You have followed me, I have no doubt, closely enough to understand, having been exhausted of all my resources and my experience, and such a native with my wits of fate have given me, and having made the most minute analysis of circumstances of the case, I'd come to the fixed conclusion that the great diamond had not been carried out of the room on the person of a human being, nor had it been dropped or thrown from the windows to the street. Yet it was equally undeniable that it had got outside the safe and out of the room. Therefore it flew out, I suppose. I could not help interrupting now, I'm afraid. I could not quite avoid the suggestion of credulity in my voice. Yes, my dear sir, replied the inspector with an emphasis which he increased, slapping 4 fingers on his right hand to the palm of his left. Yes, it flew out. It flew some 17 and 18 miles before it returned to Earth, in which it was born, if we may accept the theory of a terrestrial origin of diamonds. So far as the event proved, I was absolutely correct, wild and, as you may naturally think, my hypothesis might have been. But, he continued, stopping his walk and making an eloquent gesture of apology, being only human, I almost instantly divided the truth into error. In fact, I confess to you that there was, what I consider to be the greatest and most fatal mistake of my career. Absolutely certain as I was that the diamond had been conveyed through the air to the Berkeley Hills, and that Mr. Philip Marsden's shooting expedition had been undertaken with the object of recovering it, I had all the approaches to the town watched till he came back. He came in by the old Transvaal road about an hour after dark. I had him arrested and took him to the house of one of my men who happened to live out that way, and searched him, as I might say, from the roots of his hair to the soles of his feet. I found nothing. Of course he was indignant, and of course I looked a very considerable fool. In fact, nothing would pacify him but that I should meet him the next morning in the boardroom at De Beers, and, in the presence of the secretary and at least 3 directors, apologize to him for my unfounded suspicions and the outrage that they had led me to make upon him. I was, of course, as you might say, between the devil and the deep sea. I had to do it, and I did it. But my convictions and my suspicions remained exactly what they were before. Then there began a very strange, and although you may think the term curious, a very pathetic waiting game between us. He knew that, in spite of his temporary victory, I had really solved the mystery, and was on the right track. I knew that the great diamond was out yonder somewhere among the hills and over the veld, and I knew, too, that he was only waiting for my vigilance to relax to go out and get it. Day after day, week after week, and month after month, the game went on in silence. We met almost every day. His credit had been completely restored at the beers. Lomas, his connection, and, as I believed, his confederate, had been, through his influence, sent on a mission to England, and when he went I confess to you I thought the game was up, that Marsden had somehow managed to recover the diamond, and that Lomas had taken it beyond our reach. Still I watched and waited, and as time went on I saw that my fears were as groundless as the gem was still in the veld or in the hills. He kept up bravely for weeks, but at last the strain began to tell upon him. Picture to yourself the pitiable position of a man of good family in his old country, of expensive taste and very considerable ambition, living here in Kimberley on a salary of some £12 a week, worth about £5 in England, and knowing that within a few miles of him, in a spot that he alone knew of, there lay a concrete fortunes of, say, £1,500,000, which was his for the picking, if he only dared to go and take it, and yet he dared not to. Yes, it is a pitiless trade of ours, and professional thief-catchers can't afford to make much to do with mercy, and yet I tell you that I was watched that man day after day, and with a fever growing hotter than his blood, and the unbearable anxiety tearing it harder and harder at his nerves. I pitied him, yes, I pitied him so much that I even found myself growing impatient for the end to come. Fancy that, a detective and thief-catcher getting impatient to see his victim out of his misery. Well, I had to wait 6 months. That is to say, I had to wait until 5 o'clock this morning for the end. Soon after 4, one of my men came and knocked at my door. He brought me a note into my bedroom, and I read it in the bed. It was from Philip Marsden, asking me to go and see him at once, and alone. I went, and, as you may be sure, with as little delay as possible, I found him in his sitting room. The lights were burning. He was fully dressed, and had evidently been up all night. Even I, who have been seen the despair comes from a crime in worst of its worst forms, was shocked at the look of him. Still, he greeted me politely and with perfect composure, not affected to see that the hand that I held out to him, but asked me quite kindly to sit down and have a chat with him. I sat down, and when I looked up I saw him standing in front of me, covering me with a brace of revolvers. My life, of course, was absolutely at his mercy, and whatever I might have thought of myself or the situation, there was obviously nothing to do but to sit still and wait for developments. He began very quietly to tell me why he had sent for me. He said, "I wanted to see you, Mr. Lipinski, to clear up the matter of the big diamond. I've seen for a long time, in fact, on that Saturday night, that you worked out a pretty correct notion as to the way the diamond vanished. You are quite right. It did fly across the veld to Berkeley Hills. I am a bit of a chemist, you know, and when I had once made up my mind to steal it, there was no way of mincing words now. I saw that it would be perfectly absurd to attempt to smuggle such a stone out of it by any ordinary methods. I dare say you wonder what these revolvers are for. They are to keep you here in that chair till I've done, for one thing. If you attempt to get out of it or utter a sound, I shall shoot you. If you hear me out, you will not be injured, so you may as well sit and keep your ears open. I have the stand of success, and I must have had a confederate, and I made one of you enormous. If you look out on that little table beside your chair, you will see a bit of closed lead pipe with a tap in it, and a piece of thin sheet india rubber. That is what remains of the apparatus that I used. I make them a present to you. You may add as you like to your collection. Lomas, when he went out on duty that Saturday night, took a bit of the tube charged with compressed hydrogen and an empty child's toy balloon with him. You will remember that night was very dark, and the wind you had seen blowing very steadily toward the Berkeley Hills. Well, when everything was quiet, he filled the balloon with gas and tied the diamond. But how did he get the diamond out of the safe? The secretary saw it locked up that evening, I exclaimed in my curiosity of getting better at my prudence. It was not locked up in the safe all that night, he answered, grinning with a sort of ghastly satisfaction. Lomas and I, as you know, took the tray of the diamonds to the safe, and as far as the secretary could see, put them in. But as he put the tray into the compartments, he palmed the big diamond as I had taught him to do, and so many good lessons. At the moment that I shut the safe and locked it, the diamond was in his pocket. The secretary and his friends left the room, and Lomas and I went back to the tables, and I told him to clean the scales as I wanted to test them. While he was doing so, he slipped the diamond behind the box, and there it lay between the box and the corner of the wall until it was wanted. We all left the room as usual, and, as you know, we were searched. When Lomas went on night duty, there was a diamond ready for the balloon voyage. He filled the balloon just as so that lifted the diamond and no more. The lead pipe he just put where the diamond had been, the only place you never looked in. When the row was over Monday, I locked it up in the safe. We were all searched the next day, and next I brought it away, and now you may have it. 2 of the windows were open on account of the heat. He watched his opportunity and committed it to the air about 2 hours before dawn. You know what a sudden fall there is in temperature here, and days before daybreak. I calculated upon that to extract the volume of the gas sufficiently to destroy the balance and bring the balloon to the ground. And I knew that if Loomis had obeyed my instructions, it would fall either in the veld or on his side of the hills. The balloon was a bright red, and to make a long story short, I started out before daybreak that morning, as you know, to look for Buck. When I got outside the camp, I took a compass bearings and rode straight down the wind towards the hills. By good luck or good calculation, or both, I must have followed the course of the balloon almost exactly, for in 3 hours I left the camp and saw a little red speck ahead of me among the stones on the hillside. I dodged about a bit as though I were really after a buck, in case anyone was watching me. I looked around to the red spot and took my foot on the balloon and burst it. I folded the India rubber up, as I didn't want to leave it there, and I put it in my pocketbook. Remember that when you searched me and you didn't open my pocketbook, of course it was perfectly flat, and the diamond couldn't possibly have been in there. That's how you missed your clue, though I don't suppose it would have been much use to you if you'd already guessed it. However, there it is at your service now. And the diamond. As I said these 3 words, his whole manner suddenly changed. So far he had spoken quietly and deliberately, and without even a trace of anger in his voice. But now his white, sunken cheeks suddenly flushed a bright fever red, and his eyes literally blazed at me. His voice sank to a low, hissing tone that was really horrible to hear. "The diamond," he said. "Yes, curse it and curse you, Mr. Inspector Lispinski, for it and you have been a curse to me. Day and night I have seen the spot where I buried it, and day and night you have kept your net spread about my feet so that I could not move a step to go and take it. I can bear the suspense no longer. Between you and that infernal stone, you have wrecked my health and driven me mad. If I had all the wealth of De Beers now, it wouldn't be of any use to me, and tonight a new fear came to me, that if it goes on much longer, I shall go mad, really mad, and in my delirium rob myself of my revenge on you by letting out where I hid it. Now listen, Lomas is gone. He is beyond your reach. He has changed his name, his very identity. I've sent him by different posts, and to different names and addresses 2 letters. One is a plain, and the other is a key to it. Those are the two pieces of paper where he can find the diamond. Without them, you could hunt for a century and never go what's near it. And now you know that your incomparable stone, which should have been mine, is out yonder somewhere where you will never find it. You and De Beers people will be able to guess the tortures of Tantalus that you have made me endure. That is all you've got your smartness. That is my legacy unto you, and my curse. I had my way, I would send you all out there to hunt for it without food and drink till you died of hunger and thirst of my body, as you have made me die a living death of hunger and thirst of mind. As he said this, he covered me with one revolver and put the muzzle of the other into his mouth. With an ungovernable impulse, I sprang to my feet. He pulled both triggers at once. One bullet passed between my arm and my body, ripping a piece out of my coat sleeve. The other, well, I can spare you the details. He dropped dead instantly. And the diamond, I said. The reward is £20,000, and it is at your service, replied the inspector in his suavest manner, provided you can find the stone, or Mr. Lomas and his plans. Ouch. Ow. Okay. I don't think I would be able to get another story in tonight, because that story took about 40 minutes, and I do try to be done by 11 my time, Central, whatever it is. So, let's see who might be on to raid. Question is, do I want to raid another reader? Do I want to raid a friend? Do I want to raid a friend who's a reader? Or, of course, if anyone has a suggestion. It seems I have one sleeping cat. He'll probably come over and harass me once she realizes I'm ending. Oh, well, I see someone who's on. Yes, we will raid another reader. Oh, come on. Yeah, we're going to raid another reader. So, feel free to copy whichever message you can have. And we will raid Harp Griffin. Here's reading Vampire Story. So, I hope to see you tomorrow for some Friday Night Fairy Tales. Have a good night, everyone.
In a quiet town where the shadows play, there's a little bookshop tucked away. During the day he wears a human face, the wolf from the lore in a cozy space. Dusty tomes line the shelves with care. Each story whispers secrets almost like a prayer. With every page turned, a world comes alive. In the heart of this wolf is where dreams thrive. Oh, he howls at the moon when the night draws near, shedding his skin, no more need for fear. In his library deep, where the stories unfold, he speaks of magic, of legends untold. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, he drops the disguise and sighs with delight. Downstairs in his lair, in the warm glowing light, he gathers his friends for tales of the night. With a cup of tea and a heart full of glee, he weaves the enchantment, sets their spirits free. From princes and dragons to wishes and dreams, he breathes life into stories, or so it seems.